Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive.
From AI-inspired insights from farmers.
If you're enjoying what we're doing here, we'd love to hear from you too.
Absolutely.
Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and definitely leave a comment telling us what you want to see more of on this deep dive.
We're always looking for new ideas, and we really value your feedback.
So what farm-related mysteries are you dying to uncover?
Right.
What questions are keeping you up at night? Let us know, and maybe we'll tackle them in a future deep dive.
Okay, let's dive in. We're taking a deep look today at, the intense pressures really shaping the food industry. From the factory floor, right back to the farm itself. Thinking about rising costs, products getting smaller, and how that whole domino effect is impacting what we eat and how it even gets to our plates.
That's right. And the sources we've pulled together for this, it's a really interesting mix. We've got market reports, some economic analysis, even academic research looking at farmer strategies.
Right.
And our goal here isn't just to list facts. It's really about extracting those key insights, the why behind it all. Especially if you're someone connected to agriculture, maybe farming now, or, even thinking about it.
We want to give you that shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on this stuff. So we'll explore how companies are grappling with inflation, what consumers are actually doing in response.
Yeah, so the real actions.
The tricky challenges of sourcing ingredients right now, and maybe most importantly, some really smart, innovative ways farmers are adapting. So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
So the first big thing, the one that screams out from the sources, is this shrinkflation. You've probably heard the term.
Oh, yeah.
It's basically when companies kind of sneakily reduce the size or the amount of product, but keep the price the same, or sometimes even nudge it up a bit.
It's like inflation's quiet cousin, right?
Yeah.
A direct reaction to all those rising costs they're facing.
Exactly. And the sources show this isn't just happening in, the supermarket aisles. Restaurants are definitely in on this, too.
Absolutely. We see restaurant owners really wrestling with raising prices, maybe for the third or fourth time in a year sometimes.
Yeah.
And to avoid that sticker shock on the menu,
They get creative.
they look for other ways, yeah.
Yeah.
Like maybe using a little less cheese on the pizza.
Right.
Or making that extra slice of cheese on your burger a separate charge now.
Or just, tightening up portion sizes overall. The data from the National Restaurant Association kind of tells the story. Sales might look okay because prices are higher, but actual foot traffic, it's down.
Yeah, it dropped, 2.7% year over year in April. And that was the second month in a row it was negative. So people might be spending more when they go out, but they're definitely going out less often.
Right. And then on the retail side, it's maybe more visible, though still pretty subtle sometimes. Grocery prices overall. They climbed 12% over the last year, according to the May CPI data. That's the Consumer Price Index, the main inflation gauge.
And we have those specific examples popping up. Like Chobani Flip yogurts went from 5.3 ounces down to 4.5, or Tillamook's family-size ice cream tubs shrinking from 56 ounces to 48.
Even small things, like a Cadbury chocolate bar getting just a tad smaller, 6.5 ounces down to 6. It all adds up.
And a locked-in report focusing on UK manufacturers really highlights how widespread this is. Get this, 98% of the manufacturers they surveyed agreed that price pressures are affecting the final product.
Wow, almost everyone.
Yeah. And 43% admitted they'd already done shrinkflation, and another 56% said they were seriously considering it. Like one expert in the sources said, it happens everywhere, but it's just, easier for a restaurant to make a serving a bit smaller without you noticing right away.
Compared to spotting fewer ounces in a box when you get home, yeah.
Exactly. Now, this is where it really starts to ripple back towards agriculture, doesn't it? If food companies and restaurants are physically buying less volume of certain ingredients.
Because the end product is smaller or just uses less of that ingredient.
Right. What does that actually mean for the demand for the raw farm goods?
Well, it points to potentially lower demand, sometimes surprisingly fast. The sources flag things like dairy and beef. They could feel this pinch quicker than some other sectors.
Think about it logically. If there's less cheese being sprinkled on pizzas nationwide, or fewer slices on burgers, or if that standard steak portion shrinks from, say, 10 ounces to 8 ounces.
Consumers are just consuming less. Even if they buy the same number of pizzas or steaks, they don't even realize it. So the processors need less milk, less beef.
And the potential scale of this is pretty eye-opening for anyone in farming. One calculation we saw suggested that if this inflationary pressure keeps up and the ingredient skimping continues, the total drop in dairy demand could actually equate to maybe 2–3% of all milk volume.
Which, okay, 2–3% might not sound like a huge number on its own.
But in the dairy market, That kind of volume shift, according to the analysis, could potentially trigger like a 10–15% drop in milk prices. That's a massive hit to a farmer's bottom line.
Wow. And the yogurt example makes it even clearer, doesn't
Yeah,
it?
it really does. If every single serve yogurt maker did what Chobani did, shrank their standard size.
Yeah.
Even if people kept buying the exact same number of yogurt cups, the processors would suddenly need 16% less milk for that entire product category.
16%. Just evaporated demand because of package size.
Yeah. And the really tough part for farmers here is, once a package gets smaller, it almost never goes back. It's kind of a one-way street.
Like the ice cream example. Remember when the half-gallon basically disappeared after the 2001 recession and became 1.75 quarts?
Exactly. And it stayed that way.
Yeah.
The USDA data showed overall hard ice cream sales, by volume, dropped nearly 18% between 2000 and 2021. And a big chunk of that is likely down to those smaller standard containers becoming permanent. So for dairy, that demand loss feels, well, permanent.
Beef seems a little different, maybe, because burgers are often sold by weight, like a quarter pounder.
True, it's more nuanced. But menus can definitely offer smaller steak portions, right? That 8-ounce filet instead of the 10-ounce. Or maybe consumers at home try to stretch a pound of ground beef to make more burgers. Or retailers start promoting smaller cuts more heavily, like 6-ounce steaks instead of 12 ounces.
So even if it's not as dramatic as the yogurt thing, that slow creep of smaller portions is still there, potentially reducing overall volume needed. For you, thinking about farming, understanding these subtle demand shifts is pretty critical for planning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so beyond just shrinking the products, this immense pressure to cut costs is also forcing manufacturers into some, well, interesting and sometimes worrying games with ingredient sourcing.
If you have to sell your product for less or make it smaller while your costs are skyrocketing, you're going to look for savings anywhere you can find them.
And that UK report really drove this home. It said 76% of manufacturers felt intense pressure from retailers mainly, but also consumers, to cut their prices.
And what happens when you squeeze that hard? Well, the report found 36% of those manufacturers admitted that lower quality products were a significant result of all that pressure, which is pretty concerning.
Yeah. So where do they find cheaper ingredients? Often it means switching suppliers, maybe moving away from established, local or domestic partners.
The study found 31% in the UK had already changed providers. And even more telling, 32% had already started sourcing from international suppliers specifically for cheaper materials. And get this, another 53% were open to doing it in the future.
So that potentially shifts business away from local farmers.
Exactly. And this hunt for the absolute cheapest raw materials, combined with these increasingly complex global supply chains, it raises the ugly possibility of food fraud.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. A third of the manufacturers surveyed admitted they couldn't actually guarantee their ingredients weren't fraudulent,
Yes.
simply because they lacked visibility deep into the supply chain. The memory of that 2013 horse meat scandal still lingers.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Big deal in Europe.
Huge. And this kind of pressure cooker environment just makes those risks feel a bit more real again.
And it doesn't even stop there, does it? The cost cutting seems to be hitting safety standards, too.
It appears so. 38% of the manufacturers in that survey said safety standards were eroding, and 32% felt their own production facilities were actually less safe.
That's worrying.
It is. And think about this. Over half, 55%, said they had either reduced or would reduce their focus on improving safety simply to meet the contractual demands from retailers.
Wow. So meeting the price point becomes more important than investing in safety improvements.
That seems to be the implication. They listed concerns like more on-site accidents, needing more automation, but not having enough skilled staff to run it safely, staff just being too stretched thin to focus on safety protocols, and just a general lack of investment in safety measures.
And then the retailers are pushing liability down onto them, too.
Yeah, adding insult to injury. 56% of the manufacturers said they're spending more on insurance, and 44% were forced to take out more liability coverage, specifically because retailers demanded it in their contracts.
So the retailers protect themselves from recalls or lawsuits by making the manufacturer hold all the risk?
Essentially, yes.
Right.
Pushing the burden down the chain. And half of those manufacturers expect these increasing liability demands will eventually just price them out of future contracts. It paints a picture of a supply chain under just enormous strain. Corners being cut, risks going up, all because of this relentless push for lower costs.
Okay, so it's clear the middle part of the food chain is getting squeezed really hard. And that pressure obviously ripples outwards. So how are consumers reacting to all this? The higher prices, the smaller packages, just that general feeling that food is getting way more expensive.
Well, consumers are definitely not oblivious. They are aware and they are reacting. We saw a Barclays poll that found a huge balance. 83% were concerned about shrinkflation, and two-thirds, 65%, said they'd personally noticed products getting smaller while the price stayed the same or even went up.
So they see it, and what are they doing about it? Is their behavior changing?
Oh, significantly. About 20% of consumers are actively switching away from brands or specific products they've noticed have downsized. They're hunting for better value, maybe buying in bulk more often.
Makes sense.
And overall, 63% are actively trying to cut their total weekly grocery bill, which means, using more coupons or loyalty points. That was 41%. Buying more frozen food to reduce waste, about 27% doing that.
And just cutting back generally.
Yeah, exactly. Half of the people surveyed said they're cutting non-essential spending overall just to manage their household bills, and food costs are a big part of that calculation now.
Okay, but here's maybe the key thing from the research on consumer behavior, right? The big insight from manufacturers.
Yes, this is crucial. Consumers are dramatically less sensitive to the product size changing than they are to a direct price hike. The Janssen source had these models.
Right. Explain that simply. Like if the price goes up 1%.
Sales drop quite a bit, like
Right.
1.32% one model. But if the size increases 1%, the opposite of shrinkflation, but it shows the relationship sales barely budge, like a tiny 0.004% increase.
So people react much more strongly to paying more than getting less?
Much, much more strongly. Another way they measured it, price elasticity, was highly sensitive at negative 1.95. Size elasticity was way lower, only 0.76.
So the takeaway for a manufacturer is it hurts sales way less to make the package a bit smaller than to just raise the price on the shelf.
Exactly. It allows them to improve their margin or at least cope with rising costs, kind of under the radar. They face less immediate backlash than if they just jacked up the price tag. People might notice the smaller size later, maybe when they get home, and maybe switch brands next time.
But that price increase hits you right there at the shelf immediately.
Right. It's also worth mentioning this shrinkflation thing can disproportionately hurt lower-income households.
How so?
Well, they might already be buying the smaller, maybe less economical sizes, like a half gallon of milk instead of a full gallon. When that container shrinks even more, they might not have the budget flexibility to just buy more or switch to a bulk size.
So they might end up just trying to stretch the product further, like adding water to milk or just eating simpler meals when it runs out quicker.
Yeah, those are the kinds of difficult choices mentioned. It really highlights the equity issue baked into this trend.
Okay, so we've got this clear picture of the pressures, right? Squeeze manufacturers using shrinkflation and sometimes risky sourcing tactics, which potentially hits demand for raw farm goods and raises quality concerns. How can farmers, especially those looking to build smart, resilient businesses, actually navigate this tricky environment?
This is where some of the academic research we looked at offers really valuable strategies. It points towards needing innovative pricing methods that go beyond just taking whatever the volatile global commodity market price is that day, especially if you're producing high-value or value-added products.
Right, not just selling raw corn or soybeans at the market.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One powerful approach discussed is segmented or tiered pricing, basically charging different prices to different groups of customers or for different forms of your product, and basing that price on the value the group sees or the value you've added through processing, not just your raw production cost.
Okay, so how does that work in practice? What enables it?
Well, factors like really understanding your specific market focus, knowing how your product is different. Maybe it's organic, maybe it's processed into something else, like sugarcane into vinegar or molasses or cassava into flour. Understanding your different customer segments, building a strong brand around your farm or product. Even something called segment-based mass customization.
So if you process your sugarcane into, say, fancy molasses, you shouldn't price it based just on the price of raw sugar.
Precisely. You've added value, created a different product for potentially a different customer who values that specific thing. The research showed branding was really key for this across different crops. If farmers start selling online, e-commerce branding becomes huge. You can set prices based on your costs, plus what a specific segment, like maybe health-conscious consumers or local food advocates, is willing to pay for that identity and value you offer.
And what was that other thing? Segment-based mass customization. Sounds complicated.
It sounds technical, but the idea is pretty practical. It's about being able to offer slight variations or customizations on a larger scale without massively increasing your costs. Think maybe offering different package sizes online or specific heritage grain blends or tailored meat cuts ordered direct. You add variety, cater to specific needs, and can price those variations differently based on that segment's demand.
Gotcha. And the other main strategy?
The other big one identified is peak load pricing. This really leans into the natural cycles of agriculture. It just means charging higher prices when demand is really high or supply is tight, like during peak harvest season for certain fresh items, or maybe right after harvest when everyone wants it, and then charging lower prices during the off-peak times or when there's a surplus.
So leveraging seasonality.
Exactly. It relies heavily on understanding your market's demand patterns and, crucially, having the capacity, maybe through storage or planning, to actually supply the product during those high demand peaks. Seasonality is obviously huge in farming, so this makes a lot of sense. The study found it had a significant potential impact for all the crops they looked at.
And working together helps here.
Yeah, collaboration was mentioned. Things like farming cooperatives can give producers more bargaining power. They can also help coordinate production schedules, manage logistics, and handle storage needed to effectively manage supply during those peak periods, allowing farmers to actually capture those higher prices when demand spikes.
So the overall goal for both these strategies, segmented pricing and peak load pricing, it's about finding that sweet spot, right?
Yeah, aiming for a win-win. Prices that feel reasonable and fair to the customer for the value they're getting, but also generate enough revenue for the farmer to cover all their costs, make a decent profit, and build a business that isn't just constantly reacting to volatile commodity markets or getting squeezed by the middlemen. It's about taking back some control.
Okay, so we've walked through the pressures, the consumer reactions, and the smart strategies farmers can potentially use. Now let's bring it right back to you, the listener, especially if you're interested in farming, maybe just starting out, or even if you just care about where your food comes from. Given all these challenges we've talked about, the cost pressures, shrinkflation hitting demand, the sourcing issues.
Here's where you, as a shopper, actually have a direct role to play. You can help support a more resilient and, frankly, more transparent food system. Your choices at the checkout really do matter. They can actively push back against some of these negative trends we've been discussing.
Okay, so what can people do? First, support transparent brands. Actively look for companies that are open about where their ingredients come from. Check the packaging, look at their website. Are they telling you about their sourcing practices?
Choosing those brands sends a clear signal. It puts pressure on the whole industry to be more transparent, and that directly counters some of those worries about hidden food fraud or declining quality due to cost cutting.
Second, buy direct from local suppliers or farmers whenever you possibly can. This could mean hitting the farmers market on Saturday morning, signing up for a CSA box that's community-supported agriculture.
Or even buying directly through online platforms that more and more farmers are setting up now. It creates that direct connection, bypassing some of those layers in the middle that are feeling the squeeze and maybe cutting corners.
And by doing these things, supporting transparency, buying direct, you're essentially casting a vote with your wallet, aren't you? You're choosing to support operations that likely prioritize quality.
You're often supporting local or regional economies too, pushing back against that trend of always chasing the cheapest international source.
And crucially, you're helping enable farmers to build those direct relationships we talked about, the ones that let them use smarter pricing strategies based on the real value they create, rather than just being price takers subject to volatile markets or retailer demands. You actively help keep those farms viable.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear the food industry is under immense pressure right now. That's leading to things like shrinkflation, complex, and sometimes risky sourcing decisions. And that's definitely impacting demand for farm products.
But, and this is important, amidst all these challenges, there are real opportunities for farmers, especially those who are willing to innovate, to use smart strategies like segmented pricing or peak load pricing, leveraging good marketing, building a brand, and connecting directly with their customers to build businesses that can really withstand these pressures and thrive.
So, maybe something to chew on as you think about the food on your table or the fields in your community. If you're someone interested in farming, how might understanding all these market pressures, these consumer behaviors, how might that inform your own approach? To production, yes, but also to marketing, to connecting with buyers, to building a truly resilient farm business for the future.
Or even just as a shopper going about your week, how could your purchasing decisions, maybe small changes, actively support a food chain that really values quality, transparency, and importantly, the long-term profitability of the farmers who work so hard to feed us all? We hope this exploration has been valuable. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Hitting that like button and smash that subscribe.